Welcome to AP Television. In today's video, we'll be exploring equilibrium in the Aggregate Demand, Aggregate Supply (ADAS) model. This topic is critical for understanding how price levels and output are determined in an economy. Plus, it's an important concept for your AP Macroeconomics exam, so let's dive right in. By the end of this video, you'll understand the ADAS model, short-run and long-run equilibrium, and how economic shocks create inflationary or recessionary gaps. We'll also examine real-world applications like the 2008 financial crisis. The Aggregate Demand, Aggregate Supply (ADAS) model is a tool economists use to understand the relationship between an economy's total output, also known as real GDP, and the price level. It explains how output and prices are determined by the interaction of aggregate demand, AD, and aggregate supply, AS. The AD curve slopes downward because as prices rise, people buy less. This is known as the wealth effect. The short-run aggregate supply AS curve slopes upward because firms are willing to produce more when prices rise, at least in the short run when wages and other inputs remain sticky. The long-run aggregate supply LRS curve, however, is vertical because in the long run, output depends on factors like labor, capital, and technology, not price levels. Equilibrium occurs where the AD curve intersects SRAS in the short run and where it intersects LRS in the long run. At this point, the economy's output equals the total demand for goods and services, and the price level balances both. In the short run, the economy may not always be in long-run equilibrium. If aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply, it leads to an inflationary gap. On the other hand, if aggregate demand falls short, the economy enters a recessionary gap. An inflationary gap occurs when the economy's output exceeds potential GDP, meaning we're producing more than full employment output. This leads to upward pressure on prices, causing inflation. In contrast, a recessionary gap happens when the economy is producing below potential GDP. This means there's high unemployment and downward pressure on prices. We saw this during the 2008 financial crisis when aggregate demand fell drastically, creating a large recessionary gap. During the 2008 crisis, declining consumer spending and business investment caused a leftward shift in the AD curve, reducing output and lowering price levels. This is a prime example of a real-life recessionary gap. Both the AD curve and the SRAS curve can shift, affecting equilibrium. Let's look at how. When factors like consumer spending, government policies, or business investment increase, the AD curve shifts right. For instance, a government stimulus package can push demand higher, raising output and prices. On the supply side, an increase in input prices, like a sudden spike in oil prices, can shift the SRAS curve to the left. This reduces output while increasing prices, leading to what's known as cost-push inflation. Understanding the ADAS model is critical for policymakers. For example, when there's a recessionary gap, governments might use expansionary fiscal policy, such as tax cuts or increased spending, to shift AD to the right. The Federal Reserve can also step in with monetary policy, like lowering interest rates or increasing the money supply, to stimulate spending and investment. These tools are essential for managing economic stability and bringing the economy back to equilibrium. To summarize, the ADAS model helps us understand how an economy finds equilibrium in both the short run and long run. By examining the interaction between aggregate demand and supply, we can identify inflationary and recessionary gaps and recognize how policymakers use fiscal and monetary tools to bring the economy back to full employment. Think about how these concepts apply to real-world events like the 2008 financial crisis, where a leftward shift in AD caused a recessionary gap. These tools help economists and policymakers navigate economic shocks and restore stability. Now, here's a question for you. How do you think recent events like the COVID-19 pandemic impacted aggregate demand and supply? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in to AP Television. Be sure to subscribe for more AP Macroeconomics content, and stay tuned for our next video on inflation and its impact on the economy.